Hi. This time on the Prop Master, I'm going to make you feel a lot better about your project. So if you remember, at the end of the last video, you were probably asking yourself, what have I done? I had a wonderful looking foam helmet and I made it look about as bad as you possibly could. Now, if you went the plastic dip route, it probably looks a little better, but I'm going to assume that you followed right along with me and made the ugliest thing that you can remember ever working on. Well, I can assure you that by the end of this video, you'll be a lot happier and you should have something that looks a bit more like this. This was another challenging part of the project, and in order to save you a lot of heartache, I have sorted through over a dozen different colors of spray paint that are just slightly off from each other and picked the best two colors as far as the red and the green. Sort out all the colors that you can get easily from stores that are probably near you. We won't have to do any expensive airbrushing or mixing paints. We're going to do this all right off the shelf. Also, if you're wondering what happened to the terrible audio and the clicking that was actually the microphone on the iPhone headphones rubbing up against my beard the whole time, you'll be happy to note that I have a new microphone, which should make the quality quite a bit better and not quite so cringing to listen to. Got kind of a long video this time. In fact, so long that I've had to break it in half. We're going to have a part A and part B, or actually I guess part 6A and part 6B. I could only get it down to about 2.5 hours, and I didn't want to cut anything else out and risk you not seeing something that I was doing. So we have two videos. They should be up about 2 days apart, and I hope they're helpful. So without any more hesitation, let's go ahead and get started on your helmet. Okay, it's time to get rid of some of the ugly that's on this helmet, and also possibly find out how much more sanding we need to do. What I've got here is a 2-in-1 filler and sandable primer. It's basically primer that will fill up any little scratches and things like that. Now, if you notice, I've masked off the aluminum here, and I've masked off the T-visor polycarbonate. From there, we just want to spray this on. We want to do 2 light coats, and then a 3rd coat that's wet. Well, let's just see how it works out. It's a little windier than I'd like, but I can't really do this in the garage. And I apologize for the airplanes that are flying over. Usually they just land over our house and don't make much noise, but today, because I'm filming, they have decided to take off. And the wind is changing directions on me too. Now, you'll notice when I'm spraying that I don't go back and forth, and that's because at the end of each one of those strokes, you pause for a second and you're going to put about 3 times as much paint in that one spot as you are everywhere else. So you can really do 2 things. You can either just spray it as you come onto the object and then let go as you go off, like that, or just make sure that you start before the helmet and end after. I'm also attracting every bug in the neighborhood. You don't want to get too thick of a coat. I'm going to call that as one light coat, and in 10 minutes I can come out and put on a second light coat. It's actually pretty much dry now, but we'll go ahead and do what the directions say. Okay, it's been 10 minutes and I've spent that time moving everything out of the direct sunlight and in a little bit more protected area from the wind. Okay, and I'm going to call that coat number 2. Now remember always to, at least for this type of spray can, you need to clear the nozzle each time you use it. So it's just a matter of turning it upside down and spray it until the paint stops coming out. I've noticed that with some of the newer can technology, or spray cans, they'll spray upside down, so you can't really do that. But in this case, you still can. Okay, it's been 10 more minutes and we're ready to do a thick coat. Now, one thing you want to be careful about, especially if you lift the helmet up to get up in these little areas here, don't spray inside your helmet unless you've masked off the polycarbonate on the inside. I want to get this on a little bit, or actually quite a bit thicker than the other layers, just because I can see some trouble areas that I want to be able to sand, and hopefully I can just sand the filler primer and not have to sand all the way through everything back into the urethane resin. But if that's what I have to do, that's what I'll do. Well, I think I would call that a wet layer. And in 30 minutes, I'll be able to start sanding that. So we'll take a look at the helmet in 30 minutes when everything has completely dried. I went ahead and waited a full hour, mostly because I had to go pick up the kids from school and run a couple of errands. And it's amazing how much better it looks with just that coat of primer on it. It kind of looks like you just bought a fiberglass helmet or a urethane helmet. But along with looking much better, now that everything's a uniform color, it really becomes more obvious if they have any problem areas. I'm not sure what all you can see. Actually, it's in pretty good shape. There's a few. This looks very rough down here. And I'm noticing some deep sort of cuts in this area here. I can actually still see a little bit of the seam from the dome, which amazes me after, you know, a really thick coating of urethane that was poured over it. And then now the filler primer, and I can still see a little bit of that seam somehow. So I'll probably sand that a little bit. And if you've got some really bad areas, I noticed, I'm not sure I'll actually mess with this or not, but I've noticed that there is a little bit of a weirdness here. It actually shows up more on the camera than it does just looking at it. But if I want to take that out, it's possible that that's, you know, I can't take that much material off with the just sanding the filler here. So I may have to go ahead and take that all the way down into the urethane. And, you know, if that's what you need to do, then it's not that much trouble to go ahead and clean it up all the way down through the urethane if you have to, and then just come back and hit it with the primer afterwards. The primer will stick to the urethane just as well as it will anything else. I've also noticed there's a little, we'll say a little pimple here in one or two places. With this being Boba Fett's helmet, I'm not too worried about it being not being completely smooth, but I don't want bumps. I can live with little craters, but bumps don't really make too much sense. So I'll try to sand that bump down, and if it gives me trouble, I'll probably just dig it out to the point where it's no longer, it can still be rough, but it's no longer sticking up. And then I can just treat that like you know, some chip. So at this point, you just want to start lightly sanding everything with your fine sandpaper at this point. I'd say probably you don't want to use anything lower than 200 grit at this point. That's assuming that you're staying in the primer. If you've got a big problem, then feel free to go ahead and use as coarse a paper as you need to. I'm using the 320, the really fine stuff. Try to do little circles. I've also noticed if you go on a little too thick when you're spraying it, you can get some little cracks, but they sand out pretty easily. Luckily, I have not had that problem this time. Okay, giving it that little light sanding can really help you find some trouble spots. I'm pretty pleased. This is in pretty good shape. I'm going to want to sand a little bit over these seams again, just to try to make them disappear. I'm going to want to try to sand on the rangefinder here to get rid of the wood grain a little better. I'm going to try to clean this up a little bit right here. And these, I don't know if you can see it on the camera or not, but these little gouges that are in this area here, I'll try to clean those up. And I'll probably do a little bit of work trying to smooth that out a little better as well. Now, don't be discouraged if your helmet looks much worse than this. The last helmet that I did, the Boba Fett helmet for my son, I had to primer it 3 times because I thought it looked pretty good, and then I primered it and it looked terrible. And I had to take a big heavy file, took this file, which is quite aggressive, after it, removed a lot of material, went back, primered it again, still looked bad. It looked better in the area that I worked on, but it looked bad in other places, and so I did that 3 times before I was finally reasonably happy with it. So you can't see it that well until you spray it one color, and then it just kind of jumps out and screams at you. So, if you see an area that you don't like the way it looks, then take the sandpaper or sanding sticks or a file and, go to town on it. It's no problem just to respray it afterwards. Oh, the other thing I noticed in the back, I don't know if you can see this, in this area here, when I lightly sanded it, I see where it sanded at the top and at the bottom, and it wasn't touching in the middle. So I've got a low spot that runs almost this entire length around. So for things like that especially, your sanding sticks are the best way to go. So I've got my 320 grit sanding stick. And if I start getting to where I'm into the foam instead of the primer, then I can go to a more aggressive sand stick and really smooth it out, and then I can go back and just hit it real quick with a couple of coats of primer. But the advantage that the sanding sticks have on here is that you can't get to the low area until you bring the higher areas down, so when you've got it shaped properly. If I just do that by hand, my hand would contour into that and just sand into the dip. And I'll probably do that exact same thing on these pieces, on the mandibles in front. Just trying to get rid of any low spots. You have to be a little bit careful, as on the corners you can definitely take the primer off pretty quickly. At the same time, If that's a little bit rough, then you know, this is Boba Fett's helmet. It's going to look a little better like that, actually. If you get a real low area, you can always go back and use that same filler that you did originally. Either the regular filler glazing or the bumper repair kit. Or you can even use the caulk. Because I remember on the last helmet, there was a spot that just stuck out a little bit, but when I was trying to sand it, it kept moving around. I think it was a bubble in the Mod Podge. And I finally just had to pull it off, and it left a huge hole. But I just went in and filled it with glazing. See, these little holes here don't really bother me because they're going to look much better once we start weathering this. I'm actually going to use this little foam sanding block. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I think it's just called Fine. It's coarser than my 320, but it's nowhere near as coarse as the 120. So it's just a little bit more aggressive, and it's not going to clog so badly. I'm going to use this edge a little bit to my advantage too. See, I'm getting into the urethane there, so I may just go with a more aggressive and go ahead and just remove that, and then I'll spray it again. Here is my 120 grit sandpaper. And you can see how quickly it takes all of the primer off. Which is why you don't want to use anything that coarse for the basic sanding of the primer, but this goes beyond the primer. And I'm going to go back to my sandpaper, just the 320 grit sandpaper. And I'm going to try and smooth out the area where these seams are. Well, I'm getting better at this because I didn't film an entire section without realizing that it was not recording. So you just missed a little bit. I'm going to get back underway. I think that's got that little bump smoothed out now. And you kind of missed me working on this part up here, but there's not much to it. It's just a matter of getting the sandpaper up in that area. I did the sanding stick as well. And I haven't tried it yet, but I don't think I'm really going to need to, but something else that can be helpful is these little things here. I think you can get these at, I can't remember if I got these at Home Depot or if I got them at Michael's or Hobby Lobby, someplace like that. It's probably where I got them. It comes in a set of 3. It's kind of like the sanding sticks, but you know, they've got little shapes that you can get into it, and it's very narrow. And then when it clogs up, you can just rotate the little sander. And that's really helpful when you're trying to do something like sanding in a little space like this. But I think I've already got everything sanded. I guess I could help smooth out with it. But I've got this far, so I think I'm just going to go back to the rest of it. Doesn't have that grain problem like the top had. So I might just do a little light sanding to take the still has a little bit of like the brush strokes from the Mod Podge. It's okay for this to have some sharper edges because this isn't supposed to be armored. This is more electronics. And so you kind of want that, you know, molded look to it. Not super sharp edges, but, you know, reasonably sharp, like a piece of electronics. Okay, I think I have this ready. I'm going to go put another coat of primer on it, and we'll see if I've fixed things or if I need to go back and do some more sanding. We'll take a look when I get back. The primer is all dry now, and I'm quite happy with the results. I don't see anything that I'm particularly worried about at this point. Now, if in your case, if you've got a big weird looking area, then now's the time. Just go ahead and get your files or your sandpaper back out and smooth it all out and put another coat of primer on it. Like I said, my previous helmet, I did that I think 3 times before I was reasonably happy with it. So I'm just going to go over the whole thing with the 320 grit fine sandpaper that I have, just to give it a little bit of a tooth for the paint later. But I think we are, other than that, we're ready for paint. And I'll see you as soon as I finish scuffing this up. I've finished going over this whole helmet with the 320 grit sandpaper. Very lightly. You're just wanting to, you know, make a little tooth in there for the paint to grab onto. Now when you're doing this, you're going to be using very light pressure. If at all, you just kind of want to rest it on there and go in a circular pattern when you can. And while you're doing it, you're inevitably going to come across a spot that after you've gone over it with the sandpaper, you don't like the look of. It looks, you know, uneven and mottled at that point. And that's just because where the sandpaper hit, it changes the way the light reflects off the surface, and you've got a slight difference in height. With the lower area is going to leave a darker shape, and you need to remind yourself at that point that it looked fine before you started sanding. And once you paint it, it's going to look fine again. At this point, you're not trying to change the shape of anything. You just want to very lightly go over the surface of the primer. Now, if you come across a spot that looks bad before you go over it with a sandpaper, then in that case you might want to stop and go ahead and fix the problem. Hit it with another coat of primer, wait for 30 minutes, and then start sanding again. So we're now ready to paint. And if you look at the some photographs of the actual helmets, the hero helmets that they used in Return of the Jedi and Empire Strikes Back. Well, first thing you'll notice in those two instances, the helmets are very different on the way they're painted. And in any one movie, you can look at photos of the 5 to 7 different helmets that they used, and they all look different. So you just want to kind of depict, how you want it to look. But the way they used to weather the helmet in the movie is less like scratches and dings and more like areas where for some reason the paint did not stick properly to the helmet and has just flaked off. And that's really not the look that I want to go with, because I don't want it to look like, Mandalorians just don't know how to paint. I want it to look more like, dings and everything. They did that in the movie because these large areas of the paint flaking off is more visually interesting in a movie or on stage when you're a long way off. You can do all kinds of nice fine detail on a helmet that looks great in person, but when you put it on camera, you can't see it at all. So that's the reason why they went that route in the movie. I'm not going to go that route, but I will show you the techniques that you can use to do that. And I'll start by a couple of areas that I'm going to use that technique, mainly the dent and a few places throughout the helmet that I've already kind of located. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put on some aluminum paint. You can spray this, but there's really no need. And when you brush on paint, it has a smoother, shinier, it's not so much smooth, but it has a more reflective surface than when you spray it. Because when you spray it, you end up with little tiny beads of paint that scatter the light, compared to a brush which puts on a flat, it kind of compresses those beads flat. So in general, whenever you use a brush, you're going to get a more metallic looking surface. Now, that's saying you don't want to get brush strokes, because that's not very metallic at all. I've already stirred and shaken this paint up. This is just the Rust-Oleum aluminum. There are some nice spray paints. If you want a really shiny surface, this will do an amazing job. The only problem that I've had with it is if you get it just a little bit too thick in any one coat that you put on, it can take days to dry. So I'm just not going to go that route. I'm going to start out with my small brush. I'm going to go over the dent here, and I'm going to do it in little daubs. I hope you can see this. instead of brushing it on real smooth, I'm not putting it on real smooth because, in my opinion, when you do it, just these little daubs like this, it ends up with a more armor-like surface somehow. It's not like hammered metal, it just ends up with little, I guess it's just the way the particles settle. Gives it a more heavy metallic feature than, say, a piece of sheet metal. And I'm going to go out quite a bit past the dent itself. You know, maybe out up to a half of an inch around it. I'm getting a little crazy with that. You really want it to be more like little brush strokes as opposed to daubing it on. Now, there's a couple other places that I have found that I want to go ahead and get a little bit of the silver down. Any holes or little indentions or little areas that are a little lower than the rest of the surface. Like here's a little indentation here that I didn't notice until after I'd stopped filling things. It's a little extreme, so I definitely want to get this to look like a chipped area. I definitely do not want to get any silver down into the vent areas though, because I don't want to have to try to cover that up later. So I'm just looking around. Now, if you decide that you want to do an area and then later on you don't want to do it, this will cover up fine with paint. So you're not locked in to any decisions that you've made at this point. Okay, so I'm going to let this paint dry and then we'll be back. Okay, everything's dry now. And as you can see, there's quite a bit more there than there was when we left. I had a change of heart and I decided I'm going to go ahead and do some of the more recognizable parts of Boba Fett's helmet the way the movie did it. I'm not doing, everything exactly the way it is in the movie, but I'm going to go ahead and do the more recognizable stuff. It kind of looks like part of it's gold, but that's just the silver reflecting. You can kind of see the areas where I've gone ahead and painted it silver. Now, you don't have to paint in exactly the way you want it to look. You just want to hit the whole area with silver at this point. I've got a couple of pictures that I'm going by the hero shot. I believe this is from Return of the Jedi. Here's an image of the back. If you just look on online, do a search for Boba Fett's helmet, you can find all these, great images. Here's where you can see some of the typical differences. These are supposed to be from the same hero helmet, and they're clearly not. This one is definitely has less damage and some different damage, but I'm going to try to err more the direction here. Although you can see where I started doing this as opposed to this here, but as long as it's similar, I'm not too worried about it. I just want it to be recognizable. So now that we have our base layer of silver down, and I think you can kind of see a larger area here. Take a look at this area, for instance. It doesn't look like it's hammered. It just kind of looks like the crystalline structure of the metal is kind of visible, which just makes it look a little better than rolled steel sheets. But I digress. And by the way, if you wanted to, you could do the entire helmet at this point if you wanted to have more freedom later on and you were just kind of not sure exactly what you wanted to do. Just go ahead and do the whole helmet silver. The secret to getting the effect, and when you actually want to get the shape that you want, has to do with a mask that you're going to put down over this silver, and then with that there, we'll spray paint it, and at the end you can just rub over those mask areas and they'll peel up. You can buy masking fluid, and you might want to use that if you're going to use a brush to paint the whole helmet with a brush, but I'm going to mostly use spray paint. So the secret is toothpaste, just regular old toothpaste. This is the little free ones you get when you go to the dentist. You want to avoid specialty toothpastes with hydrogen peroxide or I don't know about baking soda, but maybe you want to avoid that as well. Just try to get the regular toothpaste. You can use other things too. I've seen online on some of the sites, I've seen people use mustard. That seems to work pretty effectively. For some reason that I don't completely understand, that completely grosses me out. I don't understand why that bothers me, but it does. So I'm going to stick with toothpaste. And you just want to look at your pictures and take your toothpaste. I found that a soft brush works much better than a hard brush. When you use a hard brush, it tends to, you get thick and then thin spots. It's much harder to control. You want to put it on, fairly thick. I obviously want the entire dent, not for the most part. I can always go in later and add some paint if I decide that I don't want it to all be bare metal. Now, if you really have your heart set on making a, painting it exactly the way it was in the movie, if you'll search on YouTube for how to paint a Mandalorian helmet, I don't remember the person that did it, but they have, I think it's like an 8-part series of videos that is strictly painting his helmet. It's not a helmet that he made, it's a replica helmet, but he goes step by step and he paints it exactly the way the prop is. So, after you watch my video, if you want to go that, if you want it to be exactly like the prop in the movie, finish watching my video first and then you can go take a look at his. Let me try to get this roughly the same shape as the Hero Shot helmet. I kind of laid out the silver for one picture, now I'm trying to do the pattern from another. This definitely improves the smell of the helmet. Okay, and I'm going to continue doing this, and I think I'll probably speed things up a bit. All done. If you've noticed, there's a couple places where I went ahead and put the toothpaste onto the primer, and I decided that maybe that would be a nice effect where you could see some primer breaking through the paint, and then where it touched the metal, breaking through the paint as well. So I think we're ready for the first coat of green paint. We're getting closer. Okay, we're ready to paint. Now, I'm not 100% sure which color I want to use. I used a darker glossy green when I did my first prototype, but it's just a little too rich, and I've got a matte green, but it's not anywhere near as dark. So I'm going to start with the lighter green, and then if I decide that I really have to, I'll get some different paint. Now, before I start painting, I have my paint sitting in a pan of hot water from the faucet. I mean, don't heat it up on the stove or anything like that, but you want it to be the hottest water that comes out of your faucet. And leave it in there for about 10 minutes, and then go ahead and shake it for a full minute. And you can see the two different greens I've got there. I'm going to go with the lighter color, which is just a little bit too light, I think, but we'll see how it looks. So I'm going to go with, you can go ahead and see, this is the color from my first prototype. And it looks good, but it's just a little too intense. And definitely too shiny. Now I've already shaken this for a full minute, but I'm going to go ahead and give it a quick 10-second shake. And I'm going to spray the entire helmet, including the stuff that's going to be black and red, mainly because I'm hoping that this layer of green will protect the toothpaste well enough that if I want to, I can use a brush. I'm going to do a couple of light coats. On days like today, I sure wish I had a paint booth in my garage. It's hard to do light coats when you're trying to get into spaces. Hard to get it. Okay, I'm going to call that a light coat, and we'll put out another one as soon as this one dries. Okay, well, it's been a little bit longer than the 15 minutes that I was going to wait and put on another coat. It's actually been a couple of days, and I have gone through every shade of green spray paint that is readily available that I could find anyway. Everything from model paints from hobby stores to the regular paints that you can get at Home Depot, Lowe's, Target, Walmart. And it's surprising how many of them look absolutely nothing like the color that's supposed to be coming out. But as far as trying to match any of the Boba Fett greens, there was one that was reasonably close. So of all these, the winner is this Krylon Color Master Paint Plus Primer Satin Hunter Green. And I got this at Walmart, so that's, at least you should be able to find that in the States quite easily. I just finished putting on a third coat. I think I can probably put one last light coat on just to hit any places that we haven't hit before. And I know what you're thinking at this point as you're following along with me, and that is, we just got the helmet looking good again and now it looks crappy all over again. Well, it's all for a good reason, and this is what those areas will look like that you put the toothpaste on. That was the other problem, is with the spray paint, I had to either do my other coats of paint within an hour or wait 48 hours. So I had to wait 48 hours. So I'm going to clear these off, do one more light coat of satin hunter green, and then we can move on with the project finally. The reason why it looks a little different out here is it's also been raining the last couple of days. The humidity right now is at 80%, and according to the spray paint can, as long as it's below 85%, we're good to go. So it's just been a little bit of a frustrating day, or a couple of days. One advantage of this Krylon paint is you can put on another coat. It says after a minute. I've been giving it about 5 minutes. As opposed to most paints that are going to say anywhere between 15 and 30 minutes. Okay, so I'll wait a couple minutes and we'll go on to the next step. It's been a couple minutes. Everything seems to be dry. This is actually a lot closer than it looks when you compare it closely to the screen images, but it's a little bit too blue. I'm going to go ahead and give it a very light dusting with this same paint that we started out with, the Rust-Oleum moss green. And when I say a light dusting, I'm going to be about 2 feet away from it. And you probably could get away without doing this, but and I'm gonna make this really quick because I just felt a drop of rain hit me. So much for 80%. Okay, I think we're finished with that now. Well, I've changed venues due to the weather and the fact that it's now dark outside. And I'm going to go ahead and risk one last spraying, not with that color. I'm pretty happy with this the way it is now, but it's just a little shiny. So I'm going to hit it with some matte clear, just to dull it down a little bit. You want to do this in light coats, just like the paint. Probably don't have to do it anywhere near as thick as the paint. You just want to give it a light dusting. And I have my garage door open and fans going. Still not ideal, but I'm a little bit desperate. And I'm sure I'll have bugs in here any second now. Okay, I'm going to let that dry for a few minutes and I'll come back and hit it again. Okay, at this point, if you want to, you can go ahead and remove the painted areas over the toothpaste on the parts that are going to stay green. And you can either get a paper towel or just a washcloth or something that's got a little more texture to it. And probably the texture is going to be good since this has been quite a little while. And remember, there's toothpaste in there, that's why I'm using slightly damp. Although, because I just painted part of this, I'm going to go ahead and go with the not so damp. In this case, it looks like it may actually, the toothpaste may have taken off the silver. Just right in the middle. This looks a bit more successful. The first one had me a little nervous. I think the problem that I'm having here is that it's been like 3 days since I put the toothpaste on there. It's a little bit longer than intended. I mean, ideally, you'd want to do this all in one day. But I'm not going to panic because it's a pretty simple fix, really. I can always go back in with some silver. And if you're not sure, you can always go with the mustard. Or I suppose you can get the masking fluid. But I've used toothpaste before in the past and it's worked fine. I just don't recommend leaving it for several days. Okay, I just realized that my mic hasn't been plugged in for most of this time. So what I was pointing out there is if you cannot find the Krylon green paint, this Rust-Oleum works. The color is really nice. I might even like it a little better, but it's high gloss. And when you find the matte finish that's essentially the same color, it comes out gray for some reason. I mean, it's a slight greenish gray, but it's way more gray than it is green. So you can get that high gloss and then hit it with the dulling spray or the the matte finish to take it back a little bit. So I think using the brush to take the paint off, and then a slightly damp rag to take the toothpaste off. And just be careful if you're using your fingernail, because depending how long this paint's been on here, you could probably use your fingernail to take off the good paint as well. Just kind of lightly go over the areas that you can see are bubbled up. I'll say this again in case the microphone wasn't plugged in all the way earlier when I said it. Just be sure and try to do this the same day. You start painting it and just keep going from there. If you use the Krylon paint, you've got a 2-hour window before you have to wait 48 hours for it to dry. It's not, as long as you keep putting on fresh coats of paint, you don't have to do it within 1 hour or 2 hours. The Rust-Oleum was 1 hour. The Krylon was 2 hours. And as long as you continue putting on fresh paint, you don't have to worry about it. But when you stop putting on fresh paint, you've got 2 hours to start putting on fresh paint again, or you have to wait 48 hours. Oh, you know what? I did that and I got distracted by the issues I'm having with the toothpaste. Don't take off the parts up here in the, where you're going to paint it a different color other than green. Stick with the top of the helmet and the back. I know it doesn't look like I'm being careful, but I am. Remember, some of this area I did it over the primer, so it's not actually taking the silver off. I didn't mean to get that close. Okay, I think we're going to speed things up here. Hey, you're another step closer. In part B, we'll finish with the basic paint and damage of the helmet and get it ready for final weathering and last minute details. Until then, I'll see you in part B.